Today's session is to give you a chance to really understand a little bit more about fear of flying, what you can do about it. I'm going to offer you 25 years worth of tips. I'm going to share my screen, one moment. So welcome to the official presentation. Welcome to the webinar. So today's session, I'm going to take you through lots and lots of tips to help you with your fear of flying. And before we get going, a little bit about me. So I've been doing this now since 1996, when I started doing the programs for Virgin Atlantic. And this chap here is Lee Midwinter. Now Lee is a really interesting guy because he came through the program when I did my very first version. And Lee, this is Lee, a picture of Lee about 2 or 3 years ago. He came and joined us at one of the last courses that I ran for the Virgin Atlantic program. And Lee has done an amazing thing. Like many people that have been through this program, he's actually now a trained pilot. There you go. So quite a few people that have come through this have surprised themselves. And I think it's about continued effort, sustained effort. And that's what I want to give you a chance to think about today, is that when you are thinking of your fear of flying, it can seem almost insurmountable. And one of the things that Lee Midwinter said to me back in 1996, said, if you can beat me, get me to get over my fear of flying, he said, you can help anyone. And I've heard that so many times. And it was a really testament to Lee and people like yourself that have been through this program and other versions of it, that do that continued sustained effort, and then they help themselves to get over the fear of flying. So there's Lee, smiling chap. So he became a helicopter pilot a couple of years after he went through our course. He came back a few years later because he had a little bit of a wobble and he wanted to get a bit of a top up. And this is not unusual anyway, because one of the things that I absolutely believe and know this to be true is that beating a fear of flying is a process. It's not just a one-day course, although for some people it can be. They can literally come on a course and that's it. In a day they feel much better. I think the real picture for most people is to give yourself permission to think, you know, how long do I think this is going to take, and give it that time. So it's a process which takes a little bit of time. And as long as we keep chipping away at the fear, there's no reason why you can't be Lee. Not necessarily that you want to be a pilot, but that's what Lee Midwinter said. And and he was just like everybody else that came through, absolutely terrified. And Lee, like a lot of people, when we came and ran that course back at what was called the Flight Centre at Virgin, he got very upset when we took him into the classroom. I have his permission to share this story, by the way, and he saw the aircraft seats. So the room itself wasn't anything like a simulator or anything fancy. It didn't move. There's no noises. There was just seats in there and then a galley area. And that's it. And that was enough to trigger the fear. And it was a real eye-opener for me and for my colleagues at the time, because we suddenly realized that how powerful this fear is, and that it just, you know, it's overwhelming. It's absolutely overwhelming. Okay, so we do get it. So there's no reason why every single person on this call can't get to the place where they feel much happier about fear of flying. So this is what we're going to do today. Some intros and stuff, which I've already done. I've introduced myself. Maybe I'll do a bit more in a second. I'm going to give you a moment to ask some questions, which I'm going to ask you to pop into the chat box, and we can take those questions as we go through. I think they're very useful, and that'll be a couple of different ways that we're going to look at that. We're going to look at pilots and their training today. So I'll take you through some of the tips that I've learned over the 25 years that I've been helping people. Cabin crew, their training, I'm going to take you through some of that as well, because I was talking to Sarah Fowler today, who's on one of the speakers that's on the 30-day program that I run. And I'll be talking about that a bit later on. She does quite a lot of the self-coach bits on there, and she's also been on one of the podcasts, which hopefully you've all come across. So I was speaking to her literally this morning, so I've been updated. And Captain Steve, who does the pilot bit normally on our fuller courses, we've had a good chat as well to talk about what the key areas that we think that people want to hear about when it comes to fear of flying. Also, we'll do some psychological stuff, which is my thing. I'm a coach, and so I will go through and take you through some of those sort of top tips and stuff. So something I want to say about, look at this. In 100 years, looking on the right-hand side, just over 100 years, the Wright brothers, right through to where we are now. And that left-hand picture was on Instagram, and I just loved it because it's a mother and daughter flying together for the first time. Just a great picture. We've come a long way. Aviation, commercial aviation, has come a huge way. Okay, the safety margins and all the rest of it now are just phenomenal. And yet, as humans, we haven't evolved at all. So it's really important to think about that concept, is that in some ways, we're probably not that much different to cave people. DNA-wise, I doubt we've changed that much. But over those thousands and thousands of years, technology, progress, etc. But humans are fundamentally the same. And yet here we are in 100 years expecting to love flying. And that isn't the case for a lot of people, which is why you're here today. I would love for you to be able to walk away from these webinars loving flying, because the whole point about it is it gives us choices. Being able to fly gives us choices, and that's what it's about. And let's just scale up a little bit more as well. It's not about just getting over fear of flying. It's also about getting your life back, because to date, when we have a fear of flying, it limits our life choices. And so what I want to offer you today is just a chance to step back and have some ideas about that and help you to get well on your way to getting over your fear of flying. And I absolutely know this is entirely possible. I've seen it with thousands and thousands of people. Me and the teams that I work with and have worked with, we've seen thousands and thousands of people just like you feel very differently about flying. Some people do it quicker than others because you've got to go at your own speed. And so give yourself permission to not be perfect. So as a result of this session, some of you, if you've only just met me, will feel worse by the end of the session. And I mean that in the nicest possible way, because what I'm doing is holding up images of aviation and stuff. And whilst there is a big part of you that's given up your time today to come and join this webinar, beat the fear of flying, there's also a part of you that doesn't want to get rid of it, because it's been like an old friend that you've had for a long time, and to some degree has kept you safe in your mind. So there's a kind of a toss-up, a decision to be made here as well. So don't worry if you start to feel a little bit like, oh, this is making me feel worse, he's just said something I hadn't even thought about. That's all normal, and that's, I would say, is fuel to be able to work with your fear. Okay, use it as fuel. And when you get that sort of resistance and that idea that you just want to walk away from it, that is a sign that you're in the right place. Okay, because it's quite a normal thing for people to do, is that they don't want to go anywhere near the thing that they fear, and yet here you are bravely walking towards it. And being brave is not just being fearless. Being brave is feeling that fear but doing it anyway, as the famous book goes. What we'd like to give you by the end of this session, I suppose, is a sense of what professional aviation is all about. And this logo was shared with us by an aviation skills partnership that have given us permission to share it. And they work with all these different areas to say, do you know, when you go into commercial aviation, there are many routes. There are many routes that you can take. Professional pilot, air traffic control, airport operations, operations and crewing, cabin crew, engineering and maintenance. And all of these people are professionals. All of these people are professionals. And this is something for you to take away, to think, when I take my flight or you take your flight, who are all these people? You know, is it just one of those things where it's just lucky chance that mine was safe? No, because every single flight, as you'll see during this webinar, has been thought about, planned, carefully considered. It's regulated, licensed. So we want you to get that sense of these teams and teams of people that are just dedicated to keeping us all safe. So what I'd like you to do now is to take a moment, find where the chat box is, and if you've got some questions that you would like answering, this is your moment to put them into the chat box. And this we'll look at the end of the session to make sure that actually we've covered the majority. Obviously in 2 hours, there's so much stuff that you could ask, and I've just taken a decision today to cover the things which I think are the main items. So I've taken some of the content from the 30-day programs I run and also from the half-day webinars and merged some of that content together to give you the key bits today. So take your time, put some stuff in the chat box, questions you'd like to answer, and then later on when we get to the end of the session, we'll go through and we'll have a look at those and see if there's any that we can answer straight away. And if I can't, then I'll get back to you with the answer, because you all obviously have signed up for this, and so I can contact you and just send you the answers to those questions if I can't answer them myself. But after 25 plus years of doing this and seeing, well, as the phrase goes, helping 30,000 people to get to over 30,000 feet, you do sort of hear the same types of questions time and time again. And every now and then somebody throws you one, you think, wow, I haven't even thought about that, which is great. We welcome that. So feel free to ask your questions, and then we can have a look at those when we go through later. So something I want to say to you quickly is that at the end of this presentation, I'm going to share with you a link, which is all the slides. So I haven't shared it beforehand because I want to talk you through them, but all of the slides that we're going through and you're going to see today, I've done those in a downloadable or printable, whatever format you want to see. So I'll put the link in the chat box at the end of this talk so that I can make sure that I've covered them all and it's sort of representative of what we're covering. Okay, so I can see there's quite a few questions that's gone in. That's great. He says with some nervousness, hopefully ones I can answer. So let's start at the technical stuff. Okay, so what we're talking about today is modern professional commercial aviation, Western world commercial aviation. Yeah, modern professional. I mean, look at that aircraft. That's just, isn't that awesome? That's just amazing. But it gets very confusing. And you think, why would I love that? Why would I want to go for that? But just look at the sheer beauty of this technology. And I want to kind of get back that wonder and amazement at that thing that we can actually take flights, the stuff that we can do in our generation, what's available to us. It's just phenomenal. But how does it all work? How does it all stay up there then? Is it magic? Well, of course it's not magic. There is all this, which is what our Captain Steve will talk through on his normal webinars. And he talks about this lift equals half rho v squared s, which I'm not even going to begin to pretend to explain because it's very, very complicated, but that is the lift equation. But it can be quite confusing, this type of thing. And then when you look at it and you think, well, I've read about this sort of Bernoulli's thing, how does that work? The Bernoulli's principle, when the air comes towards a bigger shape, but it meets at the same time how does that work? There's a pressure difference. What actually does that mean? It's really hard to describe this, but literally this airfoil shape here, that's the shape of a wing, and wings are pretty much shaped like this, so flatter at the bottom and curved over the top. And this was something that Bernoulli found out in, the 1782, around that sort of time, and I've taken this picture here from his Instagram, which I think is a dashing fellow. Look at him. He didn't really know what he had. He'd worked out this sort of Bernoulli principle, but didn't really know what to do with it. And so commercial aviation uses this and other factors, but in short order, what it basically means is that the aircraft is sucked into the air. So the lift is actually on the top of the wing. lots of people kind of imagine something's pushing up underneath, and it is, but it's actually sucked up. And that's really hard to understand. So I'm going to show you a very scientific way of doing this. And what you need is a piece of paper, or you can use, I think you can use like a 20 or 50 pound. I don't know if it works with dollars. We've got people dialing in from all over. That's why it's in the afternoon, because we've got people on the podcast and the newsletter from all over the world now, which is phenomenal. But here's my technique, okay? This is a piece of A4 paper. And I practiced this earlier, and even with my history of asthma, I was still able to make this work. This is a little bit grim, but I'll just show you. So if you want to try out this really technical method, did you see that? Now, I wasn't doing any magic there. I blew across the top of the piece of paper. I didn't blow underneath it. I blew across the top. And yet I created lift. And lift was created because there was a difference in pressure. And that's exactly what happens with the wing. So the air going over the top sucks up the piece of paper, exactly like I just demonstrated. So if you ever want to understand, how does that wing thing go up there? Imagine the size of a wing. How massive is that? Okay, and then you've got the air going over the top to the forward motion, and then you're getting up to 200, 300, 400, 500 miles an hour. And you've got that fundamental principle there when the pressure is different. So like me blowing over the top of that piece of paper, it literally lifts the paper, exactly what happens to the wing. Now, of course, if Captain Steve was here today, he'd have a probably more clever and complicated way to describe it. But that, in short order, is how it lifts up. So thanks ever so much for joining me. I hope that was useful. But if you want to try that, you'll see that it works. As long as you put enough puff across the top, you get this principle going on here. So exactly what I did, I blew across the top of the piece of paper and it lifted it up. That is how lift works. Now, I'm sorry if that's quite basic for some of you, because lots of people who come on these webinars and courses are like pretty much like scientists. You know, they could build an aircraft. But I think it's really easy to get complicated with this, and actually it's a very simple principle with lots and lots of backups built up in place. But just knowing that simple idea can be very, very helpful for people. So let me move on to something which I think is really important. And this is based on how the hell does that wing then sort of lift up? And also when I'm looking out the window, I see all these massive gaps in there like this. You might have seen this type of image. So the original aircraft, back in the 1920s and 30s, and you still get these, had like a fixed wing. And so it was just like the same shape always. So it meant that you literally could only go to a certain speed. You could only go to a certain height. It didn't have the ability to do any more lifting. So if you look at the picture on the left there, you'll see that the wing has changed shape, and they use something called flaps and slats. Flaps are at the back, slats are at the front. It doesn't matter if you know what they are, but if you've ever looked out the window, and I do recommend doing that, and you've seen the wing go whoo, do that sort of noise, and then you've looked and you've seen it's kind of dragged out a bit, and you might even seen this gap here. These are the speed brakes when this one is coming into land, and it's probably already landed and it's slowing down. So that's why those big barn door things come up, and then you see these big gaps through the wing. This is all meant to be like this. This is all meant to be like this. You can see that the slats there, so the flaps at the back, are just extended slightly because we're landing. But they're also now they change shape. There's depending on the aircraft type, you can literally look. You can Google this. If you look up the aircraft type, then you can Google how many stages of flap are there, and you could literally then count them if you wanted to. So some people find that very, very helpful. So just to sort of reassure you, this has all been thought about. And every single thing that we're going through, and I'll say this as a principle with all commercial aviation, there is no single thing that does anything. So every single component, part, whatever on an aircraft, commercial aircraft, has a backup. and that has a backup. So there's no kind of like, oh, that stopped working, oh, that's it then. There's always a backup. And this has been built over years and years and years, but we'll get into that when we talk about the psychological stuff later. So just to help you, that's what you might see. This is all normal. This is all good stuff, okay? Next thing I want to share with you is the engines. So this is what we call the classic cabin crew picture, okay? And I've got permission from this. In fact, the woman on the left-hand side, as you look at the screen, is somebody that I trained to be cabin crew about 24, 25 years ago, when I used to train the cabin crew. And she's an amazing person, but she shared this picture and said, yeah, you can use this. So look how big this engine is. Just look at the sheer power that we're talking about here. It's just awesome, isn't it? So the message to take from this is, look at the power. So just to help you, I've got a short video that I'm going to show you with a little bit of writing underneath it, which just talks you through some of the things that they do to test these engines and make sure that they're incredibly safe and strong. But can you just imagine the size of that and the power that that one engine there can generate? It's just mind-blowing, isn't it? And to think about it like this, that all of that power is there to help you get from where you want to go to another place, okay? That's why it's there. It's there to give us all that power and thrust and energy to get us where we need to go. And the great things that one of the things we talk about on our 30-day programs is about the backup system. So the fact that even if there's an engine failed, you can still take off. You can fly with no engines. So the aircraft will glide. But like I say, that's stuff that we cover a lot more on the 30-day thing. But just to get you sort of thinking about this, I'm going to show you a quick video and I'm going to shut up. It's just phenomenal, isn't it? So hopefully you found that helpful just to think about. That was just one engine type, and that's the manufacturing and the precision and the backup and the check-in and the safety that goes into every single one of these aircraft engines that you'll ever fly on. So it's just phenomenal. So let's take a sort of quick trip into the flight deck. Now, when you look at all of this, now my purpose today is not to show you what every single one of these bits is, because whilst I've had a few flying lessons, I'm not a qualified commercial pilot, so I can't show you what all these things are. But what I can tell you is that when you look at this, everything is about backups. There's no one single thing on here. So I don't know if you can see it, but you can see that the autopilot, there's more than one autopilot. There's always two pilots minimum on a commercial aircraft like this. If it gets over about 9 or 10 hours, then we get into 3 pilots. So every single thing has a backup. So there's backup screens. And if all of that was to conk out, Then you've got manual backup versions. You've got all the dials that you'd have in the older style aircraft. So you've still got all those gyroscopes and altimeters that you would have had from years ago, plus all the modern technology, which calls to hand everything that's needed as you need it. So the screens are directed, will take you if there's a fault or anything that's come up that you need to pay attention to. It will all come to your screen immediately. Now, the great thing, obviously, is that with all this redundancy built in, as we call it, or capacity, we don't need it. So most of the time, pilots will say a good flight's a boring flight, because they are just monitoring systems, but they can always intervene if they need to. And they're always talking to each other, and they're always checking things. So when we used to be able to walk into the flight deck, which I was very fortunate to be able to do for many years, you'd see how calm the place is. And everything about it has been designed to keep it calm. So even as you look at the aesthetics of that middle picture, which is a 787, by the way, everything's about comfort, making it easy on the eye. It's been designed with the human being in mind. And this is a very different picture to if you look at aircraft from the 1940s or 50s. Although most pilots I talk to will love flying those because they're much more basic, they do look very, very basic. Whereas these things, they're quite beautiful machines, and the technology is phenomenal. So everything that a pilot needs is actually, so you look at your left-hand screen, you've got the head-up displays there. So the military have had these for years, but they've got them in commercial aviation. So all the information the pilots need is right there in front of them, so they can look out the window and also concentrate on doing what they're doing. So what a fabulous place to work. So I just want to show you now 24 hours of air traffic. And the reason I want to show you this is that although some people actually find it slightly disturbing because they can see all this aircraft flying around, all of these are following routes that have been planned, permission given for their tracks across the sky. So it looks phenomenal when it's sped up like this, when they're put together, but can you see those routes that they have to follow? So all of those routes are carefully controlled and managed. It's just phenomenal, isn't it? So this is controlled all the time. I know some people have said to me that actually makes me feel more nervous because it looks like they're all just up there doing their own thing, but they're not. You can see they're all going exactly the same route. They're all separated by distance, the speed they travel at, and the height. So there's always a minimum separation between each of these aircrafts, and that's all part of the safety. The podcast that's coming out around this, which will be in the next couple of weeks, I'm speaking to an air traffic controller about exactly this thing. So look out for those if you haven't watched the podcast. Sorry, I haven't listened to the podcast so far. And they talk about exactly how safe it is and what all the backup procedures are to make sure that they keep it safe. To me, personally, this is a thing of beauty. It just makes me feel like, wow, you know, all of this is going on, and all these people that I don't meet, the trained individuals, are looking after us. So I'm hoping nobody's left the talk so far, but no, it looks like we've still got the same number. It's fantastic. So moving on, I'm going to talk you through something now, what I call the stages of flight. Now this, and there's something going to be coming out soon that Pete Higgins, who's on this call as well, has put together, which is almost like a checklist. And this gives you all of these different stages, what's happening at each stage. And the reason that you do this is that it gives you some sort of comfort, because then you think, oh, I can tick that off. And it's the old cliche, knowledge is power. Being able to know what's coming up and what's next is very, very helpful and very reassuring, because then you think, okay, no matter what flight I go on, no matter what airport, no matter what aircraft type, in broad sort of areas, it's going to be the same. Okay, there'll be some slight differences, of course, depending on how high the airport is and how big the aircraft is, but it's broadly the same. So the first thing that when you get on board an aircraft, you always do some form of taxi. Now, if you're going from JFK, for example, that could be an hour because it's a massive airport. But you'll expect some time to be in a taxi. So once you're in the aircraft, you're bumbling along. That's all normal. You taxi to the runway. Now, at the runway itself, before the pilots apply the power, they've already worked out, because they had a pre-flight briefing, exactly what the takeoff speed is going to be. They already know the likely weight of all the passengers, all the baggage, where it all is. All of this is part of the airport operations and the sign-off sheets that the pilots do before they even take the aircraft into the air. So before they even go, they already know what speed they're going to get to, what's their decision point, which we'll call V1, which I'll show you in a sec. What is the point of decision? What is the speed we should be at? And at that point of decision, if we lose an engine, what are we going to do? Now, all these discussions are going on well before you even get on the flight. And this is all part of the pilot's mentality. It's about what if, what if, what if. So what is V1? Some of you may have heard of this. V1 is the decision point. So back in probably the 30s and the 40s, when we didn't have the technology we have now, somebody would have been down the runway holding up a little flag or marker, and V1 would have been the point where those very new pilots would have said, right, now you need to pull back your stick and take off. You should be at the point now you're at the right speed, because we didn't know what we know now. But now actually V1, they don't need somebody stood there, because they know, right, okay, so once we get to this speed, we should be able to pull up and take off. And at that point there, if we have an engine failure, which is the most critical point of a flight, we can stop or we can go. And they would have already discussed this. So at the most critical point, there's an engine failure, they can stop or go. Okay, so this is really useful stuff to know, because it gives you the sort of surety that the pilots are already thinking about the worst case scenario. And again, it's not the worst case scenario, because I've been in the simulators with the commercial simulators when they've practiced this. It's a non-drama. Yeah, of course, it gets the excitement going for them, but they love it. But the aircraft is more than capable of taking off on one engine, no problems. It's got more power than it actually needs. So at that point, provided they've got they're at that point where they've got the speed, if the engine was to stop, they can still take off. And I think those sort of things are really reassuring to know. So takeoff, this is a good thing. But as you know, with takeoff, it feels different to what it actually is. So for most people who are nervous flyers, they think that they're kind of going up a bit like a rocket, because the angle feels like, well, it's like that, isn't it? But actually, it's about 15 degrees, which isn't very much at all. And a lot of people will wrongly, I'd say, compare it to, say, going on a roller coaster. Say, oh, I don't like the roller coaster movement, so I don't like flying. But that's a false comparison, because if you want excitement, then yes, go on a roller coaster. But if you want excitement, don't go on a flight, because that isn't where you'll get it, because flights are inherently, fundamentally stable. And the movement is not that dramatic or dynamic. It might be in your head, for reasons we'll come on to, but actually there ain't a lot going on. So the interesting thing for me is around about 1,500 feet, but it does vary depending on the airport. There's a noise abatement thing that goes on. So the aircraft have to pull back the engine noise a little bit. And it's not much, and they're still climbing away, but what you hear is the noise signature drop quite significantly. And what that means for you is it sounds like they've turned the engines off. But at the same point, they're bringing in the flaps a bit, they're bringing up the undercarriage. Even though they're still climbing, but the angle of that attack, if you like, is now gone from, say, 15 degrees, maybe down to 10 or 11. So it's still a climb, but to you, it will feel like falling. So your ears will be kind of lying to you, basically. You'll hear some noises. You think, oh, they've turned the engines off. And you'll hear some clunking, some really, like loads of noises. This is all good stuff, okay? This is all normal, but it will feel like you're falling if you're not aware of what's going on. So the next time that happens to you, you can kind of go, I know what this is. It's that 1,500 feet thing. Okay, this is completely normal, happens every single flight, and you can tell your brain, I know you're lying to me because I basically, my primitive brain can't cope with it. And I'll show you a picture of the ear in a minute and what actually is going on. But what happens then is you are climbing away. And what tends to happen is that you climb in stages. As you burn more fuel, then of course you can climb higher. But all of this is controlled by air traffic. So it's not just like you just do what you like. You're very, very regulated and controlled. And every vector that you, or every direction or whatever you want to go to, you have to check before you can do that. And you are actually given routings and heights and speeds right the way across the whole journey. And this is controlled by air traffic control. This is what you're given. This is what you're following. This is the route that you're given. So the equivalent would be if you're on an autobahn or a highway or a motorway, and you were told, everybody was being spoken to directly by a central controller saying, all of you travel at 70 miles an hour, okay? And I'd like you to keep at least 200 meters apart from the car in front of you, and the separation from the side, and there has to be 3 lanes gap between you and the car to your left and your right. I don't know how safe we'd be then. And if you wanted to slow down, you would need to check with the central controller before you're able to do that. So we don't drive like that, do we? We drive, well, nothing like that at all. And we don't have any idea of how well trained the person to the left of me, to the right of me, ahead of me, if they're going to suddenly stop. So it's complete. I'm not trying to give you a fear of driving, by the way. We have no idea of what's going on around us. Yet in the commercial aviation, we know that anybody who's in an aircraft near us has been through similar training and has been controlled by air traffic control and various other systems. Completely different way. So we'll do a step climb, step climb, step climb, till eventually we get to the cruise, which I think is lovely, but it can feel a bit weird for some people. Some people get a little bit disorientated. Some people start to think about, or what, you know, what's holding us up here? It's the same physics that got us off the ground. We're being sucked into the air. Those are still apply. At this point, you could lose all your engines and you'd still fly. So these are all things to think about. Not that we want that to happen. And when has that happened? Well, the only time I can think of was when the volcanic ash back in the 80s, maybe. And although they lost their engines momentarily, obviously they were still flying. They didn't know what had happened. We didn't know about volcanic ash then and what it could do. And so, but they did manage to get them restarted, and they restarted 2 or 3 of the engines, I believe, and they managed to land. I think it was the flight into Jakarta. I can't remember now. But that was learned from, which is why the aircraft were all grounded when we had that incident in the last 20 years. I can't remember what exactly it was with the volcanic ash. Do you remember that? It was very, very quiet because we didn't want to risk it. So that's the way commercial aviation works, is that we know that if something's happened in the past, we learn from it. So when it comes to top of descent, or descent as we call it, you'll start to notice that there'll be a few changes. You'll hear the perhaps the speed brakes coming up, a little bit of buffering. All of this is normal. If it's really near, so if it's quite a short flight, then the cabin crew will be up and about all the time, securing the cabin, asking you to put your seatbelts on, get your window blinds up, tray tables away, all that sort of stuff, which is all part of their job to keep you safe, to keep the aisles clear. Should, in the unlikely event that we need to get off the aircraft quickly. Yeah. So all of this stuff is been pre-thought about. It's all part of the procedures that we do. So at top of descent, it can feel a bit floaty. And actually, you don't need very much engine power then, because the aircraft are so amazing at flying that they've got the engines almost to idle, not quite, but just because they actually want to lose some height gradually in a controlled way. So for a short period of the flight, it becomes a little bit like a glider, which a lot of people don't realize, and that's a good thing. So coming into approach, it's a normal thing. This is where the pilots, they still might even be flying on autopilot, because autopilot is in for quite a big part of the journey. And the reason for that is it gives the pilots capacity. And the aircraft, as you probably know, can auto land, but they only ever do this in extreme fog, or if they just want to test that everything's working when they're doing sort of their little practice flights, which they used to do when they were teaching pilots to fly. But now pilots like to land because it's their time to get hands-on experience again of flying with the actual passengers in the back, and they want to do it because that's what they do it. So if they're flying every day, then they'll just switch it around and make sure that they're always having constant practice, and they've got to keep their skills up. I mean, the skills, by the time you come onto an aircraft like you're going to go on, they've done thousands and thousands of hours. But one of the things that keeps them so safe is some of the stuff we might talk about later, is the human factors idea, that they're always checking on each other. Nobody touches a switch without talking to somebody else. It's always checking again. Yesterday, I went down in to make myself a coffee, and then half an hour later, went to make another one because obviously, I needed another one. And I found the milk in the cupboard, and I was like, what on earth's the milk doing in the cupboard? And that was what I'd call a classic human factors error. So I'm a human, so I make a mistake. But if I was in a flight deck, that would have happened, because I would have said, right, milk in the cupboard, and they would have went, milk in the cupboard? So it would have been checked. So you don't touch anything, do anything without checking with your colleague. And that's part of the training that's evolved over the years and years that helps to make commercial aviation so safe. So coming to land, which is a good thing. A firm landing is a good landing. I know a lot of people think that you should come in and do a nice floaty landing, but the actual point of these aircraft, they're made to do a firm landing, because a firm landing means you're on the ground, and then you can kill the lift on the wings by putting up the big barn doors, remember those from earlier, and put the engines on reverse thrust. All that means is that the lift sort of goes in a slightly different direction. What we're trying to do is disrupt the lift and plant it firmly on the ground. So a firm landing is a good landing. Occasionally, and this has happened to some people, including me, you might be involved in what's called a go-around, which is when the pilots have decided it's not safe to land here, I don't like the look of it, so we're going to go around. This is planned for. So from the moment they're approaching, they're already thinking, I might need to go do a go-around. And a go-around can happen literally at the point, even as they land and touch. So why would you do a go-around? Well, it could be anything. So it could be like the aircraft that's at the very end of the runway, the other end, hasn't quite cleared. So you might decide, I don't like the look of this, or air traffic might say go around. It could be anything. It could be a cow that's wandered across the runway. Some remote places that can happen. So all of this is thought about, and that's why the pilots are always looking and checking, ready to go around at the last minute notice. And it's all part of the training, and they love it because it's a little bit of excitement for them. But what will happen if this has ever happened to you is that it will go quiet in the cabin for at least a couple of minutes, which to you, if you didn't know what was going on, will feel like forever, because you weren't expecting it. And it's the same for the cabin crew. The cabin crew were just expecting to land, all of a sudden they're going around, because the pilots are too busy to talk to anybody at that point. But within a couple of minutes, one of them would jump onto the PA and just say, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, we've decided to do a go around because of whatever reason. So they have to tell you, so you'll know. So please trust that this is a practice and the safest way to fly. It's better to go around and correct, or maybe go somewhere else to land if the winds aren't quite right. So there's lots of reasons for a go around, which we cover in our bigger courses. But let's leave it at this. The pilots know what they're doing, and this is their job, to help us keep us safe. Because remember, they're on the flight as well. So they're going to keep themselves safe, and they've all got their own lives that they want to go back to too. So this is all good stuff and all completely normal. So earlier on I mentioned that thing that happens at 1500 feet when you feel a bit disorientated, and that's because the balance organ for humans is the inner ear, the semicircular canals, and there's these little hairs that move and they sense where the fluid moves, but we are not evolved for 3D movement. So we're not birds, and so we don't know what's going on. And so often we just feel a bit like, oh, what's all that? And because we haven't got the visual cues to take in exactly where we are, you can't orientate yourself against a cloud. We make it up. That's my nicest way of putting it. Our brain fills in the gaps because we don't quite know what's going on, and so we just imagine it's a lot worse. So that sinking feeling that I mentioned at 1500 feet feels like a fall because our brain can't make sense of it. And that's unfortunately factory settings, and there's not much you can do about that unless we evolve, which I don't think is going to happen very quickly. So knowing that that's what's happening and it's just your brain tricking you, you can then say, oh, yeah, that's that thing that he mentioned, 1500 feet, feels a bit sinky, feels a bit weird. That's what's going on. And that's very reassuring in itself. Pilots get it too when they're not flying. If they're sat in the back like us, they are normal human beings. They will also feel the same. So I just thought I'd mention about jet streams because a lot of people, I've just realized there's a lot of words on there, so I'll just give you a moment to read that a second. So a lot of people talk about this as if it's a bad thing. These are good things. And I've got an amazing video I'm going to show you in a sec, which I find really powerful to just think about these big columns of air moving around the world that we didn't know about. We didn't know until roughly around the Second World War time exactly what the impact was, and that why would some aircraft were sent out with the right amount of fuel but didn't have enough to come back. We didn't know. It's because of these massive jet streams. So when we look at these massive columns of air moving around the planet, the red, by the way, is the faster wind and the blue is slower. Okay, these are just there. They're dragged around the Earth by gravity and other forces. We have no control over it, and they are not a threat to us. In fact, now we know they're there, flight planners put us into them because it gives us free lift, extra power. So if you've heard about those aircraft that have got back from New York in record time, that was last year, I don't know if you remember that, because they jumped in a jet stream and then got that extra lift, that extra bit of power. So these are normal, powerful things. So just think of it, what right do we have as a human being to demand that the planet doesn't put jet streams in? So these are just normal things. They're just there. It's all part of nature. It's natural. All we've done now with how we understand it, now we understand how they are and we can plot them and see them, and we can get in them. What does that mean? So on some routes you might shave 1 or 2 hours off the journey time because you're in one of these. The second thing that it means is that as you go in and out of these, you may, and I say may because it doesn't always happen, you may have some turbulence, a little bit of turbulence. But we'll talk about turbulence later, because actually turbulence is a good thing, believe it or not. So when we're looking at clouds and things, quite often people will be worried about these because of the difference in pressure. So all of these clouds are absolutely fine to fly through. So you will have a little bit of buffering, a little bit of movement, because the lift is slightly disturbed, but it's all normal and it's all okay. And actually, many people, when they're looking up at the clouds and looking up at the sky, will go, "Oh, it's not going to be a good day today. I'm really worried about the turbulence." And you just don't know. And the thing about turbulence is that, and I'll say this time and time again, I've worked out there's about 7 or 8 different ways that turbulence can happen. But essentially, what we're doing is tricking ourselves into thinking that we understand how nature works. Nature has created air movement. So whether it is those big jet streams or whether it's other reasons, it just moves. So let's stop calling it turbulence. It's just air movement. In aviation terms, we sometimes talk about it in 3 levels. Most people are convinced they've been severe, but severe is exceptionally rare and short. But like turbulence, you could be asked to put your seatbelts on for that if you're flying on a flight. That's not because it's actually of any danger to the aircraft. It's because it's a danger to you if you're walking about. Now, the crew might still be able to walk around at that point because they're used to it. But once it gets to about moderate, there's a good chance the crew will be asked to sit down as well, or at least suspend the service. So the way to think about this is like a bumpy street. You're just going along a bumpy street. So the lift on the wing, which is always there, as long as you're going forwards, you've always got lift, but it can be disturbed slightly and it'll feel bobbly. There's always a slight burble when you fly. You might have noticed that. It's always a slight bit of movement. But it's just air movement, and it's always there. And so if you think about it, this is a sign that we are being held in the air, sucked up by this physical power. The power of physics is sucking us into the air. That's always there, but sometimes it's a bit bobbly. So it's uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. And if you keep your seatbelt on, no harm will come to you. Which brings me to my next slide, is to think about it like this. It's just air movement. It's natural. And if you've got your seatbelt on, no harm will come to you because you're attached to the aircraft. And the last tip, which a lot of people talk about, and I'll remind you, is the bottle of water or the glass of water trick. Is that if you have that on your table in front of you or you're holding it, you'll actually see you don't move that much at all. Okay, so if you do that, you'll notice that there's very, very little movement. So that's the end of the piloty bit. I'm going to take you through some of the cabin crew training areas now. If there are any more questions that this has prompted, please put them in the chat box. But we're going to start talking about the cabin crew and the training. And one of the things I need to say to you and stress to you is that I'm talking about all airlines. There are some slight differences, but we're talking all sort of Western world commercial aviation will have to go through the same regulations. And so for those who heard the podcast for the CAA, Civil Aviation Authority, there's organizations like that in every country that look after what we call aviation entities. So everything I'm about to talk about is for all airlines. All airlines will go through service training, aviation medicine, so it's a bit more than first aid, and then cabin safety and security training. They'll have different names for it, different lengths, depending on what type of aircraft it is, but they all go through the same sort of training because it's regulated to the same standard in all the different countries. Now, the only thing that makes the difference is dependent on the route, the type of aircraft you might be using. You might only fly one aircraft type, so therefore your security and safety training might be even shorter. If you fly 3 aircraft types as cabin crew, then you'll have even more training. If you're working in a low-cost airline, whatever that means, your service training might be less than what we call a full-service airline, which prides itself on doing great customer service. But the primary role of cabin crew is safety. Okay. As one Delta stewardess said to me once, I don't think they call them that anymore, And she said to a passenger, which I wouldn't say agree with this, but it's a classic. And she said, oh, you know, I'm here to save your ass, not kiss it, which I always thought was quite amusing, but it's a true story. They are there for safety, but the reason why we feel safe is the way that they treat us. So that's why so much emphasis is placed on service training. So service training for all airlines is pretty much around these areas. But of course, not all airlines do it exactly the same. So all airlines are, you know, customer service and service recovery. So how do you help a customer? What do you do if somebody's not very happy? How do you sort of de-escalate them? You'll do some stuff around conflict resolution. I know certainly at Virgin and lots of most airlines will have some sort of form of a restraint training. And so you'll have ways that you can actually get them to behave themselves if passengers are misbehaving. So you've got all of these methods that go on, but that's not necessarily what you see when you see the service side. So these two characters here both work with me. Sarah on the right there is the one that does the 30-day program as well. So you'll hear her voice on future things if you may have already come across her, I don't know. So that's the role. So the service train, like I say, is different for different airlines, but safety is safety is safety, and that's consistent across all airlines. It's just the aircraft type that will dictate a slightly shorter or longer training session. So that's the service training. So we look at aviation medicine, all airlines again. So everyday stuff, headaches, nosebleeds, nausea, fainting, blocked ears. This is everyday stuff. Less common, panic attacks. I know you might not believe that, but that's true. Heart conditions, because many people will have indigestion and not actually know that the difference between heart attack, because it can feel quite similar. And so that's why we have some amazing bits of kit to help with that. And then in exceptional circumstances, you'll have medical emergencies and even childbirth. So some of the kit that we have on board, particularly long haul aircraft, I'd say, on the shorter ones, you'll have some of this, but not as extensive because you don't need to, because you're nearer to a convenient airport at all times. I mean, the thing I'll just say about that is the pilots always know where the nearest suitable place is to go. So a couple of things I want to talk about here. The first bit of kit here on the left is the Tempest, which is something which you can use to connect a passenger to. And this came about because a lot of diversions back in the 80s and maybe even to the 90s would be somebody would have indigestion and they were convinced it was a heart attack. So you'd land the aircraft and then find out it was indigestion. And that can all be sorted out in the air. So being able to attach somebody and then contact a service center and send the images down to them and all the readings means that we can keep flying because that's the safer thing to do and the best thing for the passenger's health. So the next piece of kit along is emergency medical kit, which is only opened and operated with permission, and it's all the stuff that doctors need. So it's not something the cabin crew would go in anywhere near unless they were told, take out this, administer that. It'd be very, very carefully supervised. But that's a doctor's kit, which we call an EMK. Every airline has some sort of version of that. The next one along is the external defibrillator. So you'll see a lot of these in restaurants and train stations, places like that. All the crew are trained how to deal with people that are actually going into a heart attack, but not everybody would operate the machine. So different airlines work differently, but there's always several people that can work the kit, and everybody is trained how to help with emergencies. You'd be amazed. And the last box on the right hand side is just your general first aid kit, which would have all your paracetamol and things like that. So in UK, for example, you can't give somebody paracetamol. Someone came into a shop and they had a headache, you wouldn't be able to give them paracetamol, but you can on board an aircraft. There's a sort of a slight quirk with the law, is that we are able to hand paracetamol or aspirin or Tylenol equivalents to a passenger, and then they can administer it themselves. So all great stuff. This is some of the equipment that we've got. So when they go through, all cabin crew go through then sort of new hire, we call it. Some people call it ab initio, but it's just new hire training. You get taken through flight safety regulations, all the sort of equipment, the locations, the emergency procedures. I mean, it's just mind-blowing. And the training, when you think, look at all this kit here, you've got to know what all of this is, where it is, how it works. And this is a pass or fail. The pass rate is around about 88 to 90% in most airlines. So it's phenomenally well regulated. So the training is actually quite intense. Here we've got a typical, this is looks like a 747 door, but it might not be. It could be a 787. It's just the handles throwing me. Looks like a 787. It looks like a Boeing door. But all cabin crew are taught how to open these, what to do if they don't inflate, how to turn it from a life raft into a slide, and all this sort of stuff. All of this is part of the training, and you get tested on this before you go anywhere near an aircraft itself. And you also have to jump down. This is a slide raft. This is the thing. This beastie here is hidden. See this little box at the bottom of the door? That's where that lives. So it's packed up, and when it comes out, it auto inflates, and you've got manuals, of course, everything's got to back up. That is a raft in this moment, but it's also a slide. So it's a slide raft. I don't know what I'm talking about. But this, I don't know how big this one is, but normally you can get about 70 odd people on one of those. So that will float depending on if you're in water, or it becomes a slide if you're on land. So this is all stuff that we think about, because it's all, of course, there's very few times that any of this actually happens. And that's why, because we get trained in it. So you've got it in your background, it's there, always there, and you get tested every year and all of this stuff. So you're always being tested. The other thing that we kind of cover with cabin crew training side stuff is crew resource management, the human factors. Remember the example earlier on, me putting the milk in the cupboard? Human factors is about communication, and this is one of the major movements from commercial aviation from sort of the 70s, 80s onwards, is that they found that actually, because aircraft were getting safer and safer and more technically sound, the faults were with the humans. So the human training has been a massive part and a massive evolution where we've got to this state of a no blame culture. So if someone makes a mistake, they can say, I don't, like for example, if a pilot feels tired or isn't emotionally okay, he or she can say, do you know what? I don't feel safe to fly. And another pilot can also say to them, you don't seem right. I'm calling it. And this is all normal stuff. Now, not many workplaces you could have that level of openness and honesty, because there's too much this fear of losing face, and this is the thing that airlines have worked really hard to combat. And of course, security side as well. There's lots of stuff in place. From the moment you book a ticket, there is a process in place, but I can't tell you much more about that. So every year, cabin crew go through all of that again. So do the pilots, actually. Pilots are tested in the simulator every 6 months. So there's something going on every few months. But not only that, every single flight, there's a briefing before it. And I mean every flight. So if you flew from, I don't know, New York to London, there'd be a briefing at the beginning. And then when the crew rest, they come back after 24 hours or whatever, they get back on the flight, there's another briefing. And each time there's route specific details, special requests. We want to make passengers feel safe. So we make sure that we know about mobility challenges, visually impaired, if there's deaf or hard of hearing, anything that's going on in terms of people that need escorts, unmins, as we call them, unaccompanied children. And then also, if there's anybody in the area that has told us they've got fear of flying, we'll do our best to look out for them. And again, there's another safety or aviation medicine question, which happens every single flight. And if you get 2 strikes, if you don't pass it, you get grounded. So it's really strict in terms of this sort of stuff. So when you look at the next time you see a cabin crew person and think, they're just sort of wandering around, just serving a bit of tea and coffee, there are also got a safety filter on. They're looking around and making sure that things are safe, things are checked, and they know what they're doing. So the last thing I want to sort of mention around the cabin crew side of it is the safety demonstration. And this often is the point for people that can be, I don't know, perhaps freak them out, because you just got on board the aircraft and then all of a sudden they're telling what to do when the damn thing doesn't make it. But again, it's about belt and braces. So if, for example, that's what I want to say. So every training course or anything you ever go on, you will have some sort of, okay, ladies and gentlemen, the exits are over there, the fire alarm sounds like that, because it's the law. So whenever there's a gathering of humans, there has to be some sort of, this is what we need to do to keep ourselves safe. And it's the same on board the aircraft. Everything has been built and put in place to think of safety first. What's the backups? What's the backups? What have we learned from the past? What can we do now? So the safety demonstration is make sure that everyone knows where things are, where your life jackets are, where the overhead oxygen is, and all the rest of it. Now, whether you pay attention or not, it doesn't matter, because if there was something that happens, you'll get very clear instruction of what you need to do. That's all part of the training as well. But part of the starting the flight correctly is to make sure that you give everybody a briefing, whether it's in a video or it could be done manually. This is all normal stuff. So just going to pause for a moment, and we're going to be moving into the psychological part in a moment. But what I'd like you to do is just have a think and notice in yourself how you're feeling now. What questions has it raised for you? Has it brought up some other things you hadn't even thought of? Is there other stuff going on as well? I'm just going to have a sip of water. So I want to take you through what I'd call the psychological input now. And this is a chance to think about this whole thing around fear of flying. Where's it come from? What's it about? Many people don't know. Some will just say it just sort of happened. But actually, I would wager it doesn't really matter if you know or you don't know. The point is, today is a chance to think, what am I going to do going forward? I want to give you some really simple ideas to think about with this. Not simple because you can't cope with more, but simple because I want you to be able to remember them. Now, the thing about fear of flying is, because it has such an impact upon us, it often gets elevated to a certain status. And I'm not convinced it deserves it, because fear is fear is fear. No matter what you have a fear of, the brain works pretty similarly in developing a fear and maintaining it. So regardless of what you have, other fears you might have, you'll notice there's a pattern, that how it starts and then it's sustained and maintained by certain behaviors that I do. So every time I do the same thing that I've done before when it comes to my fear of flying, I'm repeating a pattern. So I want to give you something to think about with this, and I call it the 5 pillars. This is in the book as well, which if you haven't read is a free download on lovefly.co.uk. And I use this, it underpins a lot of the work, and it's really been put together gratefully with all the people that I've worked with over the years, and some observations. So the first pillar, and I know it seems really obvious, but it's not. Fear of flying is not something you're born with, it's something that you learn. And if you can learn to have a fear of flying, then surely it's possible to learn not to have a fear of flying. So it's something that happens to you. It's something that you develop. It could be a reason that you know about. It could be you've no idea. Some people it's when they have kids. Sometimes it can be when you retire. Sometimes it can be just because it was a Monday and I didn't like the flight. It could be some stress. So everybody has their own reason. But the fact is, you're not born with the fear of flying. That's a fact, okay? So the good news is that no matter what stage you're at right now, it's never too late to do something about it. As long as you're alive, which you all are, I'm guessing, there's a time to do something about it. And it's never too late. I've seen people get help really young, and also people, you know, have never flown, and then at 75 just gone, do you know what? I'm going to try out that flying thing. So it's never too late, provided you give yourself permission not to be perfect. You give yourself permission to chip away at it, and you take it as a process that will take however it takes, however long it takes for you. There's no kind of like, go on this one-day course and magic it away. And this is speaking from somebody who ran one-day courses that magic it away for over 20 odd years. That does work for some people, but not everybody. And the other thing is, it doesn't magic away. What happens actually is that it depends where that person is on their mindset or on their journey. So if they've already been doing loads of stuff like CBT or TFT or NLP, all these acronyms, then they're already well on the way, and the course was just came in at the right moment. But for some people, it's the beginning point, and it's the beginning of their journey to beat their fear of flying. So wherever you're at right now, just be grateful to yourself for turning up today and being here. Okay, so the second pillar is your commercial knowledge has some gaps. And I mean that politely, is that actually your, how can I put this in a nice way? Your knowledge could be based upon what you've heard in the media, or it could be based upon somebody that you know or something that you've read somewhere. But actually, when you get more and more information of the correct type, it can make you realize that actually the fear has been based on inaccurate information. So it's a bit like a chair with the 4 legs, and each of the legs is a belief or some information about flying. But if that belief is incorrect, when you get correct information, then the leg is removed and the fear starts to wobble. Okay, and that's why I think it's really important to just be open to the idea that actually there may be some more I need to learn about this, because if I believe everything in the media, that's probably not a great place. And stuff I read in the media about aviation is such nonsense most of the time. It just does, it completely does my head in. But I can't believe the stuff that gets printed. So quite often people say, you know, I'm irrational because I've got a fear of flying. And I don't think you are irrational, actually. I think what you've done is done an incorrect risk assessment. So your fear of flying would be rational, completely rational, if it was 1 in 2 chance of something happening to you. But because the odds are so very, very remote, you just need to reassess your assessment. So your risk assessment needs another reassessment. In other words, if you were to look at it correctly and think, what is the actual chance? So am I 100% safe? No. Nothing is 100% safe. But flying, commercial flying, is not far off. So rather than beating yourself up and saying, I'm irrational, I've got it, just maybe a kinder way to think about it is that I've done an incorrect risk assessment. I thought the risk was greater than it was, but I'm beginning to accept that it might be slightly different. One of the great things I love about being a human, apart from being alive, obviously, which is nice, is that we can actually laugh at ourselves. We can actually say to ourselves, do you know what? I don't know why I've got this fear, but there I go doing it again. And so when we notice a pattern that we do, we can give ourselves permission to say, oh, I'm doing that thing again. So once we can recognize a pattern or a cluster of thoughts that we tend to do, we can step back and go, I'm doing that thing again. And that's the great thing about being a human. A dog can't do that. A dog can't think, I'm not going to, that's it, I'm done with chasing postmen. That's it. Or delivery people. I'm not chasing them anymore. I've had enough of it. They can't do that for themselves. But as humans, we could do that. Not I'm suggesting that you chase delivery people, but you get the point. And the last point, I think you're disrespecting yourself. And actually, there's two parts to this. You're disrespecting yourself and what you're capable of, because you are, and what I've seen is people who don't think they're resourceful have done amazing things, have been completely resourceful and been able to surprise themselves of what they're capable of when they put their mind to it. And if you decided that today, from here onwards, that you are putting your mind to beating your fear, you're well on the way. The other thing is you're disrespecting is all the people that have gone before you and have paid the ultimate price to make it safe for us to fly. So it is safe because 50, 60, 70 years ago, a lot of people didn't make it. And I know that's quite a bleak message, but it's worth thinking about that. Is the reason we're so safe, and this is a Matthew Said comment, that we have paid the lessons in blood. So people have paid for this. So it's our chance to go, okay, whatever happened 60, 70 years ago won't happen again because they've learned from it. And that gives me permission to feel a bit safer. So what we're trying to do when we look at commercial aviation, we're not just looking at some haphazard, like, I hope it goes all right. We're looking at evidence-based learning from incidents that have happened, and that always happens. If there's ever an incident, and I don't mean anything dire, I mean any incident, it is investigated. And that's how commercial aviation has got that safety margin to such a ridiculous level now that it's almost, and I say almost, 100% safe. Nothing's 100% safe, but it's as close as you can get it. Show me something else where you've got the amount of backups, procedures, and all the other things in place compared to commercial aviation. I can't think of anything. So those are the 5 pillars. But one of the things that I would say about fear of flying is that we get very good at practicing being scared. So this is a very rubbish example, but this is just the way I like to think about it because I find it helpful to do this. So you imagine every time you do something, you practice something, you do something and you repeat it, the brain, the neurons, the connectors, they make stronger and stronger connections across your brain. So it gets easier to do it. And you could take any skill that you've learned, even using your computer or your iPhone or whatever you use, your brain knows how to do it. You don't even have to think about it. It's automatic. It's only if you were then to suddenly go from an iPhone to an Android or from a PC to a Mac, you'd go, oh, I can't work out how anything works. It's all a bit clunky, and because you're learning something new, because your brain is, not that it's lazy, our brain prefers things. It doesn't have to keep thinking about stuff fresh every time. So if there's a route, it'll go the path of least resistance. If this is something I've always done, I'll always do it. So if you think about your journey anywhere in a car, how often do you actually go, do you know what, I'm going to mix it up today and go a completely different route? Most of the time we don't. We just get in the car, we know the route to the shops, we'll go that route. And then we'll do it every single day because it's just easier. So our brain takes the path of least resistance, and that's what it's like with the fear of flying. And another way to describe this is that someone used this recently and I really liked it, is that when we're trying to build new patterns of behavior, it takes some effort. So it's a bit like walking towards a huge cornfield and it's really high, way above your head, and you've got to cut a route through it. And the first time you do it, it's going to be really awkward. You're going to be pushing all these grass out the way, and then you'll get your little route through that field. The next time you go, you'll see that some of the grass is still down from the last time you went through there. So you trample through it, you try and keep the same route. The third time, the fourth time, the fifth time, eventually you carve a route through the field. And that's what it's like with brains and learning. So if you've been practicing being scared, you've carved out these huge automatic patterns about how to be scared. And so when you try something new, it feels more awkward because you're having to carve out new patterns, and the old ones are still there. So they're much easier. Our brain will just go, oh, I'm just not meant for flying. It's not for me. Okay, so we have to be really careful and observe ourselves, which is why one of the pillars of being able to laugh at ourselves, you can kind of go, oh my God, I can't believe what I just said to myself. That we can laugh at ourselves, we have a chance to observe our automatic behaviors, and then we can do something different. So here's some questions. I'm going to just pause for a second. I'd like you to think about these questions, and these are critical questions. I always ask these when I'm coaching people, but particularly when it comes to fear of flying. I'd like you to just think about these. What has been, is, or will be the cost or impact to you of fear of flying? If you keep it and don't do anything about it, what's going to be the impact? What has been the impact? Here's a weird question. What's the secret benefit to you of having a fear of flying? You don't have to tell anybody this. You can just write it down. And out of 10, how much do you want to get rid of your fear of flying? Out of 10, how much do you want to get rid of your fear of flying? I'll just give you a moment to think about those questions. So maybe some very strange questions there, but there is a reason for that. And, you know, for example, if you can think about the impact or the cost to you of the fear of flying, it gives you a bit of leverage on yourself. Okay, it gives you the ability to give yourself, do you know what, I don't want that I don't want this to carry on. You know, you can find the resources in yourself to, you know, say enough is enough. All of us have a secret benefit of having the fear of flying if we've got it. It's just whether you're willing to admit it or not. Of course, there's a benefit. In fact, if you look at it in a kind of holistic way, the fear of flying itself has a positive benefit. It's kept you alive as far as your brain's concerned, because your brain has decided it was a threat, flying. And so the fear of flying has kept you alive as far as your brain's concerned. Now, if you believed that completely, you wouldn't be sat here listening to this. So you know there's a part of you that believes that. Yeah, fear of flying, that's good, keeps me safe. But there's also a part of you that wants to get a shot of it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this. Why would you be listening to this? Because there's a part of you that wants to get rid of it. Which brings me to the last question. Out of 10, how much do you want to get rid of your fear of flying? Anything less than 8 in my book, or any book, is not enough. Because I only asked you how much you want to get rid of it. I haven't asked you, can you? But quite often people will, if they're honest with themselves, will say 6. I'll just, you know, I'll keep my options open. I don't really need to get over it, because you can just drive everywhere, don't you? You don't really need to fly. And this is where we see some of these sort of like the secret benefits to keeping the fear of flying. Okay, so hopefully I haven't lost your goodwill. I'd like to give you a simple model that I used a lot and some thought patterns. And of course, on the webinars and the 30-day programs, we go through this in a lot more detail, but this will certainly give you something to think about if you haven't come across these ideas before. So I've called it the change burger because I wanted to think about, you know, when you want to change something, you want to get to a desired state. The desired state is to be confident or fear-free or whatever you want to say. That, to actually feel that, can take quite a bit of effort, I think. You know, and it's possible to do that, but it's like, do you wait in order to feel happy before you smile, or do you smile in order to feel happy? So you can do an outside-in approach, which is the idea of the burger. The burger you eat from the outside in to get to the bit in the middle, whatever that is. Okay, so whether we go from the head first or the body first, we can still get to that desired state in a slightly quicker route than if we just wait till we feel completely safe and confident and happy to fly. And the other thing about this is that whichever way you attack this change burger, it's all linked. So whether you start with your head or your body, or the desired state bit, the feeling side of it, it all affects everything else. And that's great news, isn't it? So some simple ways to think about this. First thing, how do you want to feel about flying? What is it you want? So I want to feel safe, I want to feel confident, I want to love flying. Those sort of wordings are great, they're positive, rather than I don't want to be scared, because you want to focus on what you want. But then how do I get there? So a couple of ideas. Think about this. When you're free from fear, how would you walk, talk, stand, and move that's different to now? How would a confident flyer walk, talk, stand, move onto an aircraft? Now, I'd wager if you did that, you would start to feel differently, because you'd be tricking yourself. Because at the moment, if you don't feel confident flying, then you'll tend to leak that bodily. So you'll kind of slump, or your breathing will go. You might even sort of shuffle, walk on quite slowly. If you have to go on at all, you'd be checking the door, making sure they haven't shut it yet. All of this stuff, that's what you're doing with your body. And you wouldn't sit how you're sitting in an aircraft seat if you were sat at home watching the television. You'd never sit like that watching the TV. It'd be uncomfortable, wouldn't it? But that's how we sit on the plane, and then we wonder why we don't feel great. So getting our body to do the way we want to sit is more helpful. And what would you say to yourself if you were free from the fear of flying? What would your self-talk be? Because the most important person you'll ever talk to is yourself, as you know. So that's just a couple of sort of quick ideas. So I thought what I'd do is I'll take you through some thought patterns and then some bodily stuff that you can do. And so make a note if you like these. But like I said at the end, I will share the link for the for the downloadable slide, so that you can think about this again. So unhelpful thought patterns, head stuff. So what I'd like you to do is I'll go through these and I'll read them out, because I can't see all of them on my screen. It's possible that you can't either. Is that to think which of these you do. So just make a note of these. That's what I'd like you to do. So listing. One thing happened, then another thing happened, and then that happened. And I was about to take my flight, and then this person told me about the flight they've been on, and then that made me think that obviously these things come in threes. So listing is something where it's like almost like a domino effect, but you start to notice one thing, and then you start to do another thing, you see another thing, and that must be a sign. That's what listing is about. Okay, so if you do that, you're human. Trusting your belly too much. So you have a stomach that is a perfectly balanced and calibrated altimeter. So it just didn't feel right. I felt like we fell thousands of feet. So you listen to these words, your belly, gut instinct, or even your ears are not developed enough to know exactly what's going on. But that's something that people believe. I just didn't feel safe. I didn't like it. Lose it. I'm going to. This is the fear of literally I'm going to lose it. I just know I'll be out of control. And I've had people say that to me. If I get on that flight, I'll be literally screaming my head off. Okay. So that's something you're practicing in your head. That's the unhelpful thought pattern. And to be really respectful here, which is why I've got to stress that thing, we can laugh at ourselves. There are only two types of thoughts. I'm giving you a bunch of them here. They're either helpful or unhelpful. Time police. So they said they'd be taking off at 12:10, but it's now 12:22. What does that mean? I can only actually fly for 3 hours. If it's 3.5 hours, I can't fly. That's it. It's not safe for me. That's the time police. Weather reporter. So you monitor the weather. You're in close links with the weather service, the Met Office, and you know exactly what the weather's going to be at every stage of the journey and the destination. And in fact, you could just tell by looking up at the sky. You just know. This is meant tongue in cheek, by the way. The ability to predict the future. I just know it'll be my flight. Nostradamus, who can predict the future. That's what you can do. I just know if I take that flight, then that'll be it. It'll be the one. So we are convinced of our own ability to tell the future. I just knew that was going to happen. I knew it. These are all normal things, by the way. So if you're thinking I'm about to log off from this call, who is this man? These are all normal things. Conspiracy. They said there's a small technical delay. I don't believe them. They're lying. The captain came on and she said, we'll be delayed for a while. Small technical fault. Don't trust them. And my favourite, and the most time-consuming, is the stand-in pilot that concentrates for the whole flight, keeping it in the air. Thank you very much. It's great. It's helpful. Saves a bit of fuel. But actually, maybe it's time to let that one go. Stand-in pilot on high alert the whole time, just in case. Because if I'm not concentrating, anything could happen. So hopefully I haven't lost your goodwill. They are deliberately done to just sort of go, over the years of seeing thousands of normal people, I hear these sort of things. There's some more as well, but these are the main ones. So let me give you some helpful thought patterns to counter it, but just have a quick look through your list. Which ones did you tick? Well done if you've got all 8. But if you've got even just one of those, then congratulations, you're a member of the human race, and this is what humans do. You're normal with some perhaps unhelpful patterns. So some ideas around some helpful thought patterns. Give yourself a break. In other words, be a little bit compassionate with yourself. Do you know what I mean? You are, after all, a normal human that's just got into some bad habits. So maybe you can just say, do you know what? I've had this thing, but I'm doing something about it. I'm on the road to getting rid of the fear of flying. And actually, I don't think it is magic, but flying, well, yeah, all right, it's magic. It's amazing. And that's why we called ourselves Lovefly. We want people to love flying. It's an amazing experience. So just think about the wonder and what we can do in our generation, and to miss out on that. So just actually try to look at the flying and think, what a great gift that I can get on flights. Fairly inexpensive, and go to places and do these amazing things that people before me couldn't do. So it's actually magic. We need to look at Turbulence and rebrand it, because at the end of the day, it's just air movement, and air moves. So we have no right to control it. It just moves. That's its job. And we make the use of that with jet streams and things like that, but it's just movement of air. So that's why it needs a rebrand, because we get ourselves in a state thinking that something special or weird is happening to us, but in fact, it's just air movement, happens every single flight. As long as you've got a seatbelt on, there'll be no harm comes to you or the aircraft. And the last thing is maybe to think flexibly. As an overarching thing, that I must get on the aircraft first. I must fly during the day, not at night. I must sit over the wing. I must sit, all of this kind of forced, I must do this, are then things that then if they don't happen the way that you want them to, then will cause you more discomfort. So thinking flexibly gives you the ability to sort of go, do you know what? I'm doing that thing again. I'm trying to control everything. But actually, I'm going to decide, I'm going to put the control with the pilots, because this is what they're trained to do. I'm going to let the cabin crew know I don't feel great, and I'm going to put the control with them. This is what they're trained to do. Okay, so some of my favorite body tricks. And the thing about these is that it's not just that you just do this and go, oh, that was easy, that was done. It's about repetition. We're trying to carve a new route through that cornfield, aren't we? We're trying to get a new route, which takes a little bit of effort. So the first thing is, will you just sit there? So in other words, be okay with it. Just, it doesn't feel comfortable for me right now. I don't like it. It doesn't feel right. Just sit there. And in fact, if you can just sit there and do the next technique as well, you'll notice a significant change in your physical, mental, and emotional state. Just sit there. And actually, like I said earlier on, if you sat there like you do when you're sat at home watching the television on an aircraft, you'd feel differently because your body's trained how to react. If you sat how you sit on an aircraft at home, everyone will be looking at you go, what are you doing? Why are you sitting like that? Because it would be a completely wrong image for you and you'd feel very different. So sitting there in the way that you would sit there as if you sat somewhere you like, a safe place, is part of retraining the body. The 4-2-6-2. This is what I call paced breathing. I've actually found lately that's come from something called polyvagal theory, which I hadn't heard of. Well, I've sort of heard of, but didn't know what it was. And they literally used something very similar to this. And I thought, have I nicked it? I didn't think I did. But anyway, who cares? It's out there. It's a recognized thing. Breathe in through, if you try this anytime, if you were to do this, one thing you went away from this talk and did this every day for a couple of minutes a day, breathe in for 4 through your nose, hold for 2, and breathe out for 6 through your mouth. Hold for 2, and repeat. If you did that 3 or 4 times a day, you would find the ability to do it when you really needed it because you're putting more capacity in the bank. Okay, the 4-2-6-2. And I've had people literally tell me afterwards, nothing else worked, but the paced breathing was the thing that kept me on the flight, and I can't believe it. It calmed me down. But you need to practice it a little bit before. So even if you do this a couple of times a day, no one needs to know. You'll build the capacity to do it when you really need it. Act as if. Back to something I said earlier on, how would a calm person act? So it's a principle that we've come across over the years where if you act as if you are a confident person, you start to look confident and you start to feel confident. So if I was to act as if I was confident, what would happen? And funnily enough, some of these things I often think, oh, can that work? But I've had lots and lots of feedback from people who said, you know, the thing that helped me, I just pretended to myself that I was actually confident and started chatting to the person next to me like a confident person would do. And before I knew it, I started to feel a bit more confident because we can trick the rest of the system. So when you get on board the aircraft, make it your space. You know, where would you ever sit on somewhere for 6 hours and just sit there? You know, unless you do a Netflix binge, but even then you'd probably get up and wander around. But people get on aircraft like that. They won't move, won't go to the toilet, you know, but make it your space. So bring water, bring loose clothing, get the air vent on, clear the stuff around you, put everything overhead or under the seat so you've got clear room. And then you can feel like this is my space. This is my space for the duration. Okay, claim your space. And the last technique, which is comes under the bodily one, is the twang technique, which is come from a thought interrupter technique that they teach in various disciplines actually. But one of them is you put this elastic band around your wrist, and whenever you have a negative thought about flying, you twang it. And the point of it is it's to bring you back to your conscious. So you know what you're doing automatically. And that's the point of the twang technique. Again, it's one of those ones, really simple idea, but people have said to me, do you know what really helped? Was that every time I twanged it, I thought, oh my God, I'm doing it again, I'm doing it again, I'm doing it again. And that consciously doing something different starts to interrupt an automatic pattern. So let me give you a few other tips, which I've kind of loosely mentioned, but just to sort of sum up. Hydration and snacks. So make sure that you're self-sufficient. Consider whether window or aisle. I like aisles because I like to get up and walk about. But you know, if you're avoiding the window, book a window. I don't like windows because I don't have to then ask people permission to get up and nip to the loo or go and get a drink. If you can afford to, go large. In other words, get the go premium or something like that, where you get it's a completely different experience. You'll get the same flight but different experience, or at least get an exit seat, and you've got a bit more room around you. If you don't like movement that much, sit over the wing, because that's the least movement. You do get the noises there. Noises are good, but the wing is the most stable part. Not that the rest is unstable, but everything moves around the wing. The wing is the central part of the aircraft, yeah? So you get the least amount of movement there. Try looking out the window. You'll be amazed at the beauty that's out there. And that's why I think it's a magical thing. So not being able to do that means you're depriving yourself of that amazing stuff, but also you're more disorientated because you're then taking your references from the cabin, which looks weird depending on where you're sitting. Make your life a bit easier, go direct and go early. I always say to my family when we go away, the airport's part of the holiday. Let's just go in there early, let's go and have something to eat, let's have a little bit of browsing. Now I know that might seem alien to some of you, but it's to think about it. You work hard all year if it's a holiday, and then you go away and you hate it because you're worried about the flight. So you start trying to change our main mindset around this, is that the whole thing is the holiday. So it can be an adventure if you choose to see it slightly differently, and that can be done with time. And like I mentioned earlier on, the bottle of water altimeter, so you get an accurate perception of what the aircraft is actually doing in terms of movement, not what you think it's doing. So remember a couple of things. It is a journey. It's a very safe one. You do not have to love flying just because we do. Think of the destination. Being able to fly gives you choices. And it's life-changing, this stuff. When you get to do it, it gives you opportunities that you wouldn't have had. And when in doubt, if you need that extra push, think about what the fear has cost you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to share some information with you, and this is an offer. So one of the things that we've got going on in the background, we've got a few courses. This is obviously a free webinar today, and delighted. The podcasts are free. We do lots of free stuff. But to keep us going and to be able to offer more specialist help for people, we do also have some programs that you charge for. But the rates at the moment, the fees, the self-coach is £95. The premium 30-day program, which is coaching with me, is £950. I'm not even looking at this one here because that happens very rarely. But an offer that we're going to have now for anybody that watches this for the next 48 hours are these prices. So after this webinar, I'm going to jump onto the back end of the system. I'm going to change the prices on the website, and for 48 hours from the moment I do that, these are available. So if you would like to get some more specialist help, I would love to spend some time with you. Quite a few people have done this 30-day self-coach thing, which is 30 days of videos direct to your inbox. Some are shorter, some are longer, where you'll meet me, Sarah, who's on here, and Captain Steve will take you through all the main bits that we've done in a lot more detail than what we've done today. That has been phenomenally helpful for a lot of people because it gives you that time. It actually takes about 60 days to change a habit. So, but 30 days is a great start, and then keep doing positive stuff like watching the podcast and stuff like that. So just to give you some idea, these are the special rates that we're going to do for the next 48 hours. And I'd love to see some of you on some more specialist help. Now, just some final thoughts. He says, nervous of the word final, hence the inverted commas. We're going to have a quick look at your questions in a second. I'm also going to ask you for some feedback, which I'd like into the chat box, and stay in touch with us. Spread the word if you think it's been helpful. We've got the Facebook group, which is a private group. We Lovefly, Overcome Fear of Flying. We've got the newsletter, which has got 28 countries on it at the moment, which is just amazing. We've got the podcast, and also in the app, or you can get this on Audible as well. Chapter 12 of my free book has got a relaxation session as well, which is Fear of Flying Base, which I recorded. I've actually had some feedback that it was good, but I couldn't bear to listen to it. No one likes their own voice, do they? But those things are all available if you want them. Now, what I'd like to do is I'm going to share in the chat box the link for, I'm going to have a look at your questions in a sec. What I've got here is a link. So for the workbook, sorry, the slides from today. So you can print this off or do what you like with it, really. Scribble on it. So there you go. If you click on that, that'll take you to the slides from today. So you can have a look at those. I've seen a couple of people have dropped off, which is a shame. Hopefully they'll watch it later. I would love to get some feedback from how the session's been whilst I have a look at your questions. So if you could have a look in the, okay. Right, thank you very much. Yeah, so if you can pop some feedback in the chat box, that'd be great. And I'm going to stop recording now as well. Thank you very much.